unrealized idea. Unrealized. Come on, you guys know what it is. The original 1996 Twister. Let's discuss. With the announcement of this year's Twisters, inevitably my mind went to the 1996 original. I hadn't seen it in ages. I was instantly reminded of how whisked away I was with the movie. I remember, and one person watching this video will know this story because I don't know if they'll remember the detail, but this person was in class with me. So I first saw this movie in 8th grade, my 8th grade science class. Mrs. Wright was our teacher. And one day, she showed us several movies throughout that school year. But one of them was Twister. And we'd watched it over this course of, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 days. I was taken with the film and terrified by the elemental nature of the threat, which is obviously tornadoes. Like most any human, I find natural disasters quite scary. And when they're depicted in such a way, as they were in this movie, and plus movies just in general can make things feel oddly more real internally. So you watch something on the big screen and it's an experience because it's on a big screen or whatever it is, but you leave the theater experience with something inside. It's in your system. When you go to sleep, when you dream about it, that's your most personal place. And even though it's a dream or a nightmare, whatever it is, there's something intensely real about that experience. And so having a fear in your belly about natural disasters, particularly one as devastating as tornadoes, it was really something for me as a young person, because although all natural disasters carry with them a certain level of fear, tornadoes particularly was something that was quite haunting. And this is coming from someone who's lived through a few earthquakes, a couple of terrible storms and stuff. So I know what time it is. We're out here in California, earthquake territory. So I'm young enough and old enough to remember the 1989 quake and how crazy that was. It's its own level of ridiculousness. But and then of course we have wildfires out here and everything else. I mean, I don't live in that area, but I think that's an equivalent fear where, seasonally there are wildfires to be concerned about. And if you live in the Midwest, in a place like Oklahoma or Kansas or somewhere else along the tornado alley, then you got to worry about tornadoes. Such is the case of the characters we find in this movie, led by Dr. Joe Harding, played by Helen Hunt, who I had a crush on a lot of people during that time in my life, and Helen Hunt was one of those people. I knew her from Mad About You, the television show on NBC. I'm sure people know her from other things, but my first notice of Helen Hunt was Mad About You. And I don't know what, I was a weird kid. I watched a lot of different weird shows, and never mind the show was beyond my age range at the time. I must have been like 11 or 12, and I had a crush on a lot of the ladies from the NBC lineup, particularly the ladies from Friends, Wings. You could add Wings to that. A lot of the NBC shows, and a lot of the ABC shows too. But that's beside the point. Helen Hunt, Mad About You. That was when I first noticed her. Then I started seeing her in movies like Twister, and then a couple years later with As Good as It Gets with Jack Nicholson. I loved her in that movie. So she's fantastic. So Joe Harding is the lead scientist storm chaser, and she oversees a team of these individuals who are trying to chase the storms, study them with the goal of using a system, a machine, an apparatus called Dorothy. The goal of which is to help increase response times for people to escape tornadoes when they hit or before they hit, so people have more time to be prepared and be safe. Her co-lead, Bill Paxton, plays Bill Harding, the former husband of Joe, who is coming into this situation. We meet him coming in with his fiancée, Melissa, who is a therapist. They're coming in to meet Joe to get some divorce papers so that they can go off and begin their life. But if you know this movie, you know that a lot of things happen and a lot of things get in the way that are going to have to be navigated before Bill and Melissa are going to be able to get out of the situation. And so that's Twister in a nutshell. You have opposition in the form of Jonas, son of a bitch, who is played by Carrie Ellis, who you may know from The Princess Bride, a lot of other things. He is in Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning. He's been in countless television shows and movies, and he's deliciously not nice in this movie. He really sinks his teeth into this role. But that's what we have here. And of course you have a bunch of tornadoes, and that's it. In watching, obviously it's hard to not compare this movie and the new movie, the new Twisters. And I think when I think about the two movies together, what comes up for me, I mentioned in my Twisters review that I think the original Twister is stronger. It had so much going against it in getting the picture made. You probably know about the behind the scenes drama. Such, not only just getting shots, getting the picture made, having to deal with weather, not just bad weather, but good weather. You needed to manipulate the good weather to make it look more stormy. They had all these different things to contend with. You had drama with some of the personnel, director, and some of the camera crew people. You had drama with actors getting injured. You had tons of different things behind the scenes getting in the way of making the movie. The other thing is that I appreciate about this movie is that while Twister had known actors, none of them were really superstar actors. They were in the mix. They'd been in the mix for some time. People like Philip Seymour Hoffman. You have people, obviously, Bill Paxton and Helen Hunt. Carrie Ellis might have been probably the most well-known actor, I think, in this movie. Maybe. There's a couple other people in here in the movie who've been around the block for a while and are again fairly known. But this movie wasn't necessarily like a star vehicle like that. It wasn't like devised for like people who are already hot to come in and make the movie bigger. Like, I feel like Twisters has that distinction. Before Twisters, Glenn Powell was already a known name. He'd been around the block for a while, but I think when Top Gun Maverick came out and started showing a deeper element of his acting chops, that already put him on the map. Then of course you have his recent slew of movies with the Netflix movie that just came out, and then of course Twisters. And then also Anthony Ramos, who a certain group of people knew from Hamilton, which was a massive Broadway musical. So he was fairly well known. Transformers was a known property. Anthony Ramos was a part of that. In the Heights, also well known in the Broadway musical scene, who he ended up playing the lead in that. So Anthony Ramos, and then also Daisy Edgar. She was Where the Crawdads Sing. If you haven't seen that, it was an amazing book that was award-winning book that was made into a film, and she was great in that. So she was pretty well known. But I think Glenn Powell had the largest star presence. And Twister, the original, didn't really have that. Everyone was mostly on a similar, relatively neutral, even playing field. Also, want to call out, I can't remember the actor's name, but he plays Diamondback in the Luke Cage Netflix series, season 1. It was cool to see him in the background as one of Jonas's people. So keep an eye out for that dude. He's the only black dude in the group, so you can't miss him. But yeah, so you have that going on for it. And I think for Twister to have the caliber of actors that it comes to the table with, who everyone is good. They may not be like super duper stars at this point, but they're all good. And the fact that they have that crew and then the movie becomes a huge hit. And of course, this catapults actors into other directions. Many of these guys would go on to have solid, stellar careers. Philip Seymour Hoffman, you would know, he would go on to win an Academy Award, and if that means anything to anybody, but he would go on to have a stellar career. And then obviously, of course, Helen Hunt would go on to win an Oscar for her role in As Good as It Gets. And, a lot of these people would have thriving careers. Bill Paxton as well. Bill Paxton is an interesting case, too, because to my knowledge, I'm sure he may have had other leading roles, but I seem to recall Bill Paxton for a long time was a character actor. Even when he became established, he played a lot of sort of side roles, bit roles, the superior here, the bad guy here, the weirdo here, the jerk, the guy, he had these like character types he would play. But this is one of the more prominent films where Paxton is in a lead position. He's essentially a co-lead. This is, make no mistake, this is Jo Harding's story. Like, she's the main character through which we are feeling a lot of the deeper emotions. But Bill Paxton is an equal sort of solid co-lead. And that's really cool to see him in this position where he has a lot of, his presence is memorable in a way that's because we see him a lot more than we would in another movie. He always is memorable, but because he has a lot more time in this movie, the movie is better for that. My favorite sequences, I think, in the movie has to do with Aunt Meg and how Joe and the crew, they get to go visit her and she cooks them steak and eggs, and it's just a lovely, heartwarming, intimate sort of family gathering type of scene. And it's and in the midst of that, you get to know a little bit more about Bill, a little bit more about the Fujita scale and what the tornadoes, the strength of the tornadoes, and a little bit more about Joe. And these are things that are revealed through the dialogue and facial expressions and stuff. And it's a really beautiful sequence, and you want it to last longer. But the fact that it also is great with the length that it lasts. It's a lovely scene. It's probably one of the best quiet moments, I think, in the movie. And pay attention to that. Pay attention to the acting in that sequence. So good. Speaking of the acting, what else is there to say? Helen Hunt is amazing. I forgot how good she was in this. I told you I hadn't seen this movie in so long, but I forgot how good she was in this movie, and how charming. She's quite charming. You look at this here. Let me show you this clip. Just look at that. You see her when she pops up, when Bill greets her. How you walk away from that, Bill? Now, everyone has their own barometer with how they think someone is pretty and what their beauty is going to be eye of the beholder, whatever it is. Now, Helen Hunt's probably not going to be the most drop-dead gorgeous person to a lot of people, but the energy she exudes in this sequence, if I'm Bill, I'm going, oh, you can't help but give that a second look. Like, okay, she's kind of charming right there. Okay, I'll hang back. We get hints of what their marriage was like, and you understand little bits about why why they had to separate. Having come back into the circle on this day, on the day we meet Joe as an adult, you get to see, wow, she's quite charming. Bill, and you see what Bill could have seen in her, and conversely, you see what Joe saw in Bill. I think throughout as we get through the story, we're learning more about them through the lens of them being separated and getting bits and pieces of what their marriage was like. And we get to see why the other person fell in love with the other person. You get to know a little bit about them. And I think it's great in the ways that the movie does it. We don't see flashbacks. We don't need them. The movie does a perfectly good job of doing that, of suggesting enough stuff just based on what's there between them in terms of their body language and what's written and what we see on screen. and that's great. Conversely, Bill Paxton is dynamic in this role. You see him, you get to see him play the annoyed. A lot of times you see him annoyed with Joe, and he's like he knows her so well. Like, oh my gosh, this girl is like, you see how she drives him crazy, and he plays it so authentically, and it feels so real, and it's good to see that side where Bill Paxton he's playing like a regular dude who's like, he's not a weird punk rocker dude like he was in Terminator. He's not like this weird like jerk creepy dude in True Lies, like he was in True Lies, and he wasn't like this like eccentric soldier person from Aliens. Like, although he's great in Aliens, like don't get me wrong, like Bill Paxton's great in all these roles, but here he's a stripped down jeans and collar shirt dude, like regular dude who has a knack for understanding the nature of storms. And it's nice to see them play up each other. But this review would be not a real review if I didn't talk about the other star of this situation, and that is the Twisters. Now, a lot of people will probably say that the effects are dated in this movie, and they may very well be. To me, as I watched this probably recently, since I've seen Twisters, I've watched Twister maybe 3 times recently, and it's still effective. Again, like Twisters, there's a formula for how these Twisters show up, and they show up and they build. Each new tornado builds in intensity, and so at the same time, as we are learning about the Fujita scale, we're seeing tornadoes that are examples of that number. If it's an F1, which is F1 during this time, F2, and so on and so forth, up to F5. And as the tornadoes increase and we see them do more damage, they become increasingly more animated and more like a character. And as an aside to this, I was reading something about Twister, and then I watched a conversation with the director or some of the filmmakers. Someone talked about, I may have mentioned this also in my Twisters review, because I think this was something that movie was also playing with, which was the idea that each Twister is a character. And this is like a Universal monster movie. Funny, because Universal was one of the distributors, one of the studios behind this movie. But to go even deeper, that each Twister had a sound. They had a distinct sound, as if they were a different type of monster that had a different type of something that identified them outside of the Fujita scale. The level of intensity was one thing, but each collection of sounds that made up that Twister was a new thing. And that's another way to think about it. I think how that can add to the terrifying nature of this kind of natural disaster. To this day, I think the F4 tornado is probably still the scariest for me. Like, it still hits something deep in the core of my being. It happens at night, and there's lightning and thunder and junk, and you see it appear. You know it's there, but you don't see it until the thunder hits, and it's such a visceral. I could see that watching on the big screen, how terrifying that would be. But even watching on a home screen, it still speaks to something that feels very, very real, and it's very well done. And on the level of it's still scary. So the visual effects, I think still hold up really well. And not just the visual effects. This was so good at the practical side of it too. This is the other thing that I think gives Twister an edge over Twisters, just in terms of the level of ingenuity that the filmmakers had to have. You had less resources in 1996 or 1995 when they were shooting the movie to make this make this a reality. And computer generated imagery was on the rise then. It was still a new thing. Prior to that, I would say probably one of the bigger examples of early computer generated stuff was with Jurassic Park 3 years earlier. you started seeing the dinosaurs being. There were other examples prior to that, but in Terminator 2, of course, you had other touch points in the trajectory of computer generated imagery and how it was used to enhance images and things in film. But a big one, I would count Terminator 2 as a big one. The next one would be probably Jurassic Park, and then the next one after that would probably be this movie, and then of course Independence Day as well. So you had these points in the 90s where computer generated imagery was really doing some stuff, and it was still new. So this movie had a lot to work with and a lot to work to achieve something that was believable and still felt like it could be visceral. And I think that in tandem with the practical stuff, with all the debris they had to use and what they had to do to make ice for the hail and all that type of stuff, to put all that into, however dated it seems, it looks good. Like it was a perfect marriage of early CG and practical effects. And I buy it. I still buy it. It works in the moment, because if you suspend your disbelief anyway, you're already doing that. So you just continue to suspend your disbelief in the moment of action, and it's great. So the tornadoes are fantastic. That's the key. They're the stars of this movie, and that's it. That's the key. So, and then of course all the intimate moments, the really beautiful moments of wonderful acting and quiet acting. Helen Hunt, I can't sing her praises enough. She owns this movie. She has moments of quiet introspection, and you can tell she's still, you can tell both Bill and Joe have feelings for each other still, but the way she shows it, she doesn't have to speak to it. And oftentimes it's quiet. It's beautiful. And it's really touching. You get to feel the emotions that she's feeling. I can't say how positive I think her work is in this movie. She's fantastic. I forget the actor's name who plays Melissa, but she's also very good. She has a lot to do for someone who's not like a main character, but she is sort of the audience surrogate. We're learning about tornadoes and stuff through her. She's asking a lot of the questions that a lot of the lay person doesn't know about when it comes to tornadoes and all the sort of technical jargon that comes up in the movie. So she has to do that work. Plus she has to deal with some of the more emotional stuff with Bill and being kind of the woman in the middle, really. She's in between Bill and Joe and having to navigate that relationship. She's very good. And Meg, she's a powerhouse. She's great. I've seen her recently on Law and Order Organized Crime. She plays the mother of Stephen Lang's character in that show, and she's very good. She's still good, and she's good here as Joe's aunt. She helps really enhance the heart of this movie. And so, again, a lot of stuff to say. There's tons of stuff to say, but I think I've been talking for long enough. So I'm going to end the video here. And if you've watched this for this long, thank you for sticking around. I urge you to see Twister if you haven't seen it. And I'd love to know what you think. If you think this movie holds up still, do you think it holds a candle to the new Twisters? Or what? Is it whack? I'd love to hear your thoughts about that. But in the meantime, I'm going to get going. So take it easy, and I'll see you in the next video.